There are few names more synonymous with the German state than Bismarck, and few statesmen who would have more impact on modern European history. The man who would engineer the creation of one of the most powerful nations in Europe entered politics as a representative for Prussia in the German parliament at age 32. By age 48, he was Chancellor of Prussia, the most powerful of the German states. Motivated by what some would call self-interest and what others would call realpolitik, Bismarck sought to unify Germany and lead it on a path to continental dominance. The means by which he pursued this goal would not only make him unpopular among his contemporaries, but also create an authoritarian government in a state founded on democratic ideals. Additionally, the incompetence of his successors in dealing with the conditions he created would lead Germany into a war it could not easily win, a great war which would become the most horrific conflict in human history up to that point. The states of Germany in 1860 were only loosely connected in a union called the German Confederation. Bismarck, who began his political career as a representative for Prussia in the Confederation, shared the view of many Germans that these states should be unified into a single state, one which with careful planning and administration could, even at the moment of its creation, be the most powerful nation in Europe. Opinions differed greatly on how a potential German nation should be governed. In 1862, Bismarck made his worldview clear to the Prussian Chamber of Deputies in a speech, in which he famously said, "Not by speeches and votes in the majority are the great questions of the time decided. That was the error of 1848 and 1849, but by iron and blood." This attitude towards how a state should be run would define Bismarck's political strategy and relationships with the other parts of government. While Bismarck did not seek to take away the people's voice, he succeeded in silencing his most vehement political opponents. By aligning himself with the monarchy rather than with a political party, he succeeded in putting himself into a position to gain more direct control over Prussian and German affairs. Throughout his career as Chancellor, he chose to ignore Parliament and tighten the control of the executive branch over Germany. Following his exit from German politics, this meant that the monarchy took control of Bismarck's nearly absolute power, with disastrous results. While the Iron Chancellor made sure that the wars he started were easily winnable and worth the cost, even remarking that preventive war is like committing suicide for fear of death, the Kaiser would not do the same. Bismarck pursued unification, driven by the idea that a unified German Empire would be best for the German people. As Dr. John Stoff said, Bismarck wanted Germany to be strong and unified, but his reasons for doing so were not benevolent. While not entirely self-interested, he saw an opportunity to put himself in a position to establish and lead a great power, and to weaken his opponents in the process. In order for German unification to be possible, Bismarck knew that a new sense of pan-German nationalism would have to be promoted, and that Prussian authority of German politics would have to be retained. Moreover, he reasoned that if there was any hope for his goal, popular German sentiment needed to be focused against a common enemy. The Second Schleswig War gave Bismarck an opportunity to do just this. The war was fought over the question of ownership of the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein, held by Denmark but claimed by Germany due to the ethnically German population of those areas. Austria, fearful of increasing Prussian dominance over the German people, attempted to intervene in order to consolidate their own power in German politics. However, Bismarck refused to allow Austrian troops through Prussian territory, prompting confrontation between the competing powers. When the rest of the German Confederation sided with Austria, Bismarck declared war on Austria and invaded other North German territories. A subsequent Prussian victory in this Austro-Prussian War alienated Austria from German politics and fulfilled Bismarck's second requirement. Prussia stood as the undisputed German power, thus allowing Bismarck to pursue the final step towards unification. The solidification of Prussian power, coupled with Bismarck's iron and blood attitude, set a precedent for a militaristic and autocratic German state, taking influence from Prussia's strong leadership and martial tradition. After Bismarck's death, Kaiser Wilhelm II put aside the former Chancellor's stance toward Austria and chose to align Germany with the Austro-Hungarian Empire. While this move solidified Germany's position against rival powers, it risked the fact that an Austro-Hungarian war would inevitably be a German war, even perhaps a pan-European war as well. What has become known as Bismarckian diplomacy is perhaps the most intriguing and least understood aspect of the leader. In practice, it entails a complicated and meticulously engineered alliance system designed with two main goals: to keep Russia on Germany's side, and to deny France allies. While this policy worked without a hitch when Bismarck was in power, without the Iron Chancellor to keep control of the increasingly complex web of alliances, the system threatened to collapse in on itself as the continent edged closer to general war. France became an unwitting but integral player in Bismarck's unification plan when it fell victim to his most dramatic diplomatic and military action, the Franco-Prussian War. Through one carefully worded telegram, Bismarck took an insignificant issue of Spanish succession and used it to simultaneously enrage the French into declaring war on Prussia and unite the German states against a clear aggressor. France had played the role of a common enemy that Bismarck had needed, uniting all of Germany with a sense of nationalism and leaving only formal unification as a sovereign nation to seal the deal. Unfortunately for the people of Europe, Bismarck did not and could not have foreseen that his nationalistic empowerment and anti-French campaigns would become the ruin of the German Empire he created, as millions of patriotic young men on both sides of the Western Front marched into the trenches and did not leave the same way. The struggle to keep pan-German nationalism alive did not end with unification. Bismarck, now Prime Minister as well as Imperial Chancellor, distrusted both Catholics in Germany, who he felt were disloyal to the state, and the influence of the Catholic Church over Polish minorities in East Prussia. In response to this, he launched the Kulturkampf, or culture struggle, in order to take away these impediments. The state was given control over both public education and education of the clergy, civil marriage was introduced, and power to expel clerics not meeting state requirements was implemented. However, concerns about the negative effects of these policies deeply concerned the Kaiser and eventually Bismarck himself. The Kulturkampf ended, leaving Catholics and Poles embittered against Germany. Polish nationalists waited begrudgingly for an opportunity to fight for their independence. While the Great War saw Poles fighting for all three occupying powers of their territory, the contributions made by Polish soldiers fighting against Germany encouraged the Allied victors to grant Polish independence after the war. Perhaps the most lasting legacy of Bismarck's rule is the multitude of social reforms he made for the unified Germany, including standardized state-run education. The Bismarckian system of education has been copied by nations since, and elements of it are used in the US. When implemented in the German Empire, the system promoted German nationalism, allowed for better recruitment and conscription, and standardized the education of a new generation of officers, many of whom would fight in the First World War. Kaiser Wilhelm II took power in 1888 and pursued an aggressive foreign policy to expand German influence. After many months of heated debate between the aged statesman and the brash emperor, an enraged Wilhelm tried to take away Bismarck's influence in politics. Bismarck, after writing a harsh resignation letter, retired from politics at the age of 75. His last warning to the Kaiser was, "Your Majesty, so long as you have this present officer corps, you can do as you please, but when this is no longer the case, it will be very different for you." He spent the last years of his life at his estate, waiting for a chance to return to politics that never came, dying in 1898 at the age of 83. Bismarck's intentions and policies would not be continued by the bellicose Kaiser Wilhelm II. The complex yet brilliantly handled alliance system with the many European powers became a recipe for disaster, as the Kaiser's foreign policy terminated the Russo-German alliance and allowed France to align itself with England. Under his direction, resources were dedicated to creating a new German navy intended to confront England's Royal Navy, further increasing hostilities between the rapidly forming Triple Entente and Central Powers, as they would come to be known. As the Iron Chancellor lay in his final resting place outside Friedrichsruhe, Europe's next general war loomed on the horizon, waiting for a damned fool thing in the Balkans to set off the powder keg and let slip the dogs of war.